Hi everybody, this is Joy at Red Pine Quilt Shop. Today we're talking about piecing backing fabrics, and specifically talking about being careful to keep the fabric going in the same direction. So I've laid out a chunk of fabric and a remnant so you can see it's all flowing in the same direction, and we can kind of simulate what a lot of times will happen when you're piecing a backing. Many times people, if they have to take and piece two pieces of backing fabric side by side, they'll lay it out and they'll flip the tail back and find the middle point. They'll fold it back to find their halfway point, and then go ahead and cut along the middle of the big chunk of backing fabric. And they'll come back then and say, okay, well, the fabric's right sides together, I'm ready to sew. I can go ahead and sew my backing seam. Now, if you do that, what you will find, I'm going to just slide this over a little bit so Julie can keep us in our camera shot here. What you'll find is if you fold it this way, you sew your backing seam, and then you flip this open, what has happened is you have changed the direction of the fabric. This piece is still kind of flowing this direction, but you rotated the other piece, and now it is going in the opposite direction, and you can really see it with those feathery leaves on this flower, that these are going this way and these are going this way. So when you fold your backing fabric in half, you have to fold it in half. You're splitting it into two pieces, and you get ready and you go ahead and cut on that seam. What you want to do is to flip it back open and then slide it around before you sew your backing seam together. So you should never have the matching selvages getting sewn to each other. It should always be the two different selvages, and you can really see this one's a little narrower, it's got the printing on it. This one's a wider white one, so that you want to make sure you're not sewing the matching selvages to each other. It should be the not matching selvages, because if in that case you're keeping the fabric running in the same direction, and you can really see it with those feathery leaves. The other thing too, make sure when you sew your backing seam, I like to sew mine with about a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I will normally go ahead and leave the selvage on. I'll sew in probably an inch or however far I have to sew in to make sure that I can trim the selvage off and still have 3/8 of an inch in my seam allowance, because I like to have a little heavier seam, especially on a big quilt. And you do want to make sure though that you come back and you trim that selvage off. So either trim it off before you sew, or sew with a very heavy seam and trim it off after you sew, but do make sure you trim that off, and make sure that you are not sewing the same two selvages together, because if you are, you're reversing the direction of your fabric. I'm going to show you another little example with a smaller project. So this was a little runner. I needed to back it, and it is narrow enough that a half a width of fabric, so as it comes off the bolt, I can make it. I'm going to quilt this myself, and a half a width of fabric was enough to do it. So rather than buying a big long chunk of fabric, I was like, I'm fine with a seam in the middle, so I can take a chunk of fabric as it comes off the bolt and split it where that big, that tough crease is that we always have in it when we send it home with you from the store, and we've taken it off the bolt. There's always that very firmly pressed crease in the middle where it's folded and wrapped onto the bolt. So what I could do with this one is just split it where that crease was, and I would have enough fabric to do less yardage for my backing if I piece them end to end. So again, with this, I've already cut this piece, and our tendency is to want to match those selvages up. So when I cut it on the fold and go ahead and flip this piece back and get ready to sew, our tendency is to want to try to put those two selvages together. But look what's happening when I do that. You can really see it with the maple leaf and that leaf going that direction, and now all of a sudden they're going the opposite direction here. because I changed the direction of my fabric. So if you're doing a little project like this and you're splitting it on the fold and then going to sew it end to end, you know, this is what it's going to look like after you split it. You want to make sure that you keep that fabric going in the same direction. So slide this around, and you are going to end up with a selvage on one side and a selvage on the other side, but slide that around and piece it that way, because now you're keeping the directionality the same, and you can see that gold leaf and the oak leaf, and now they're all continuing to go the same direction. So definitely something to think about when you're piecing your backings. Watch, make sure that you're keeping the fabric always going in the same direction when you piece the two sections together, or three sections, or however many you might need to piece to make your backing. That's what we have for you guys today. Thanks for joining us.